I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and for the last 4 months or so, I have been driving this Volkswagen T-Roc R and really stacking on the miles, using this vehicle as my commuter day to day, heading into work, using it on road trips, using it as a support vehicle for everything we do here at Chasing Cars. So I feel like I've really gotten to know my little lapis blue T-Roc R. Now, I realize 4 months might not sound like a huge amount to you, but when it's my job as a professional road tester to drive a different car every couple of days, spending this long in one vehicle really does feel like a long time. And I think I know now the 5 really good parts of this car and the 5 things that Volkswagen should work on in future. And in this video, I'm gonna let you know what those things are. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. The first thing I've loved about the Volkswagen T-Roc R is the price, the positioning, and its value for money within Volkswagen's range. Now, traditionally, I was always more of a GTI fan than an R guy myself, but when the T-Roc R came along, it actually offered a bridge between the relatively wide gap between the Golf GTI and the Mark 8 Volkswagen Golf R. And I actually think when you look at the numbers and you look at what this vehicle is able to provide in terms of performance, it's really quite compelling. This thing puts down 4.5 second sprints to 100, well and truly beating its own claims, which is pretty impressive. It's also got 221 kilowatts of power and all-wheel drive, though it's not quite as up to date as the Golf R, which has 235 kilowatts and a slightly better all-wheel drive system again. It's a little bit like how if you go to Apple, you can buy this year's iPhone or you can buy last year's one at a big discount. That's kind of what the T-Roc R is. It's basically a Mark 7 Golf R wrapped up in the shape of a sporty little SUV. And I think it looks pretty good. You also don't need any options. This car has 0 options. The lapis blue paint is a no-cost option. I opted for the silver package rather than the black pack, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. The one thing I would have added would probably have been a panoramic sunroof, which would set you back $2,000. Another thing that I've loved, particularly as a city dweller, has been the size of the T-Roc R. Now, many years of road testing has shown me time and again that Volkswagen Group are experts at packaging, because the interior is actually decently spacious in this vehicle, but the external dimensions are really compact. It's under 4.3 meters in length. It's only just over 1.8 meters in width. So that means if you've got a tight parking space or you have to park on the street, a T-Roc R is going to be easier to live with than a bunch of other vehicles. And despite that, it's still packing in okay boot space, although that in itself is kind of a bit of a negative, as we'll see later. It's packing in all-wheel drive, it's packing in all of these goodies despite being a relatively small car. It's efficient on space, and I like that. The top thing that hasn't been so good about the T-Roc R is its fuel consumption. Now, I kind of had to go scratching around for negatives with this one because the car is so enjoyable that you actually don't mind fueling it, but my long-term fuel consumption with this vehicle has been about 11 litres per 100 Ks, which for a 4.2 metre long, small, sporty SUV is not that bad when you consider you've got 221 kilowatts of power and all-wheel drive. But if you're coming out of something like a Golf GTI, for instance, you are going to notice a definite jump in your fuel consumption with this vehicle. Plus, it requires 98 octane fuel, not 95, 98. That's because this thing has a petrol particulate filter. Here in Australia, we suffer from relatively sulfuric fuel. So if you put even 95 into this car, you're risking clogging up the PPF. That's a little bit annoying. What it means is that if you drive about 15,000 Ks a year in this car, you're going to be spending in the vicinity of $3.5 to $4,000 just to fuel this vehicle. So you'll need to adjust your running cost budgets accordingly. A further negative that anyone who's considering packing heaps of stuff into this car will need to know about is that the corresponding factor to it being relatively small and easy to park is that it isn't that practical. Just because this isn't a Golf and it's technically an SUV doesn't somehow turn it into an enormously pragmatic vehicle in terms of your cargo space. Now, it's not that bad. Got that cool boot trick where you press in the badge to open the power tailgate, and it is nice and wide. The aperture, they've pushed it right as far as they could. You've got about 392 litres of space in here. So that is more than a Golf R hatch, but it's less than the Golf R wagon, which has been sadly discontinued. You'll get a couple of suitcases back here, but nothing major. Now the boot floor, which is really sturdy, it looks like it's going to be a false floor, but it's not, because our market actually gets a space saver spare, which is becoming genuinely rare these days and is certainly a nice to have. You've got a cargo blind as well, but that's about it. You know, you've got a couple of hooks. You can do the ski hatch there or fold the seats 60-40, but that's kind of it. Basically, I see this as more like a lifted hatchback than a true SUV. If you step up to the Tiguan R, it has a much bigger boot, but it doesn't quite sparkle as much as this vehicle to drive. Now, the interior of the T-Roc R isn't perfect, and I'll come back to some negatives later, but the positives in this cabin revolve around the basic components, all of which are really decent. That starts with the seats. So we've got an R-specific seat for the T-Roc R, and it is really supportive and comfortable with Napa leather as the finish and really tall side bolsters. This thing's capable of sustaining some pretty strong forces in the corners, and these seats really do hold you in, which is great. They're also heated, and the heating is like thermonuclear in this vehicle, so I almost never used setting 3 because it will singe you pretty quickly. So they definitely work. We don't have seat cooling. In summer, this dark cabin with black leather does get a little bit hotter, and seat cooling would be a really nice improvement for a forthcoming T-Roc R. Steering wheel, nice steering wheel. We've got perforations where you should be holding the wheel, and we've also got these big paddle shifters right here. Now, they're not metal, they are plastic, but they've got a kind of cool, like magnesium-esque look to them, and they're big, so again, they work. Touchscreen, we've got Volkswagen's older screen here. It's only 9 inches in size, but it's got wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, inbuilt navigation, the lot, and it's easy to use and in a good position. The digital cockpit works really well and is easy to navigate. We've got discrete climate controls down here. They are based around sliders, but modern V-dubs just don't have their own climate panel, so this is really nice. Bit of a blast from the past. Leather gear shifter, again, a proper gear shifter, not a little nub like a Golf. We've got a nice positive shifter here. We've got an armrest, which you can adjust for height and for length. So hopefully you're starting to see what I mean in terms of the things you interact with day to day. Your seat, your wheel, your armrest, your shifter, your screens, they work just as you would expect, which makes this car easy to live with. But as I said, it's not perfect. But as I alluded to, there's a dark side to the T-Roc's interior too. Firstly, that it's just very dark. A lot of people will like that. Charcoal seats, black headliner, black plastics. That apparently means sporty, but it can mean that it is quite dark in here. But at least there's some blue stitching and some cool blue ambient lighting at night time as well, which does spice things up. Moving on, we have the steering wheel buttons, the haptic touch ones. These have been a bugbear of many road testers, but I gotta say, this is one of those things where when you review a car for a few days or a week, this can really grate on you, but when you drive it pretty much every day for 4 months, you just learn to live with it because you adjust where your hands are on the steering wheel. Should you have to do that? Probably not, but that's what you have to do in order to not bump the steering wheel heating button, which is what you want early in the morning on a cold day like today where it's 12 degrees, but probably not what you want when it's the middle of summer, and just grazing that button is far too easy. As you can see, it activates the steering wheel heating. You can graze the R button if you do it on the left side, but that's kind of cool because R mode makes it sound good, so some people will want that. Further, some of the materials are obviously cheap in order to get this car to a price point. You get a nice fake stitched leather dash, which is soft, but everything down here, and unfortunately all the tops of the doors are all scratchy plastics, but this car is quite a bit cheaper than a Mark 8 Golf, which does have more of that sort of soft plastic element to it. I think a lot of people would probably take harsher plastics given the big discount on the price of the car. In the same vein, the back seat is just good enough. I sit relatively close to the steering wheel despite my 6 foot or 183 centimeter frame, and as you can see, I do fit back here, but it's not what you would call luxurious or generous, so don't go thinking that just because you're stepping up from a Golf into an SUV, the T-Roc R is somehow enormous, because it's not. You'll get a couple of people back here in a pinch. Really, this car is more about the people up front and a little bit of cargo behind them. But genuinely, the reason the price is so appealing is because the performance actually stands up. Let's launch this thing. That's quick. Wow. This thing's got an engine, that's for sure, but it's also got a transmission and an all-wheel drive system that come to the party. Now on paper, 221 kilowatts these days doesn't even look that impressive, especially in the world of EVs and where we've got super hatches making 300 kilowatts and the like. We've got 221 kilowatts here and 400 Newton meters of torque from sort of like a half generation old E888 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine. But you know what? The performance on tap is excellent. And the E888 really does pair well with the all-drive systems that the R division have used over the years. the T-Roc R really gets out of the hole when you launch it. And impressively, it easily beats Volkswagen's 0 to 100 claim. In our testing, it managed to put down a 4.55 second 0 to 100 time. The brakes were similarly excellent too. Our emergency stop from 100 to 0 took just over 35 meters, which is better than virtually any other combustion SUV out there. This thing has some tremendous stoppers on it. More importantly, the performance is actually deployable on real roads, not just when you do 0 to 100 launches. It finds grip, it deploys power, it's a very pacey car from A to B, if you keep the transmission in S mode. If it's in D mode or if the car's in eco, the throttle response becomes very doughy, trying to chase fuel economy. I just found myself tapping the shifter into S mode when I wanted to keep things much more lively. A bit of a surprising strong suit of the T-Roc R is its sparkling handling. The chassis on this vehicle is just excellent. Now, Golfs have been fun to drive for years. The T-Roc R really just feels like a slightly lifted Golf, but the lifting of it hasn't really worsened the handling. If anything, it's maybe induced a bit more body roll than what you get on, say, a Golf R hatchback, but you can actually work with that. You can get into a real flow with the chassis on this car. And because of everything that works in harmony here, you can get quite greedy with the T-Roc R. Because it's got good grip, zealous turning at the front, you can carry a lot of speed into corners, and you can kind of brake later and later once you start getting heat into the tires of this vehicle. The chassis really talks to you mid-corner as well. You know where the car's at, you know how much grip you've got, and then you're able to work with the rear end, which is a multi-link independent rear. You can tighten your line, and the rear end just comes around really faithfully and will start to get a little drifty if you want that, but only off throttle. And that's because we are lacking a feature here compared to the Golf R. And in the negative camp is one piece of dynamic technology that you do miss out on when you save money and go for a T-Roc R compared to a Golf R. And that's that the all-wheel drive system is a generation behind what you get in the Golf. So what we have here is a Haldex all-wheel drive system. It does always divert some torque to the rear, so it's not waiting to wake up when a wheel slips, for instance, which is what you get in, say, like a run-of-the-mill Tiguan, for instance. There is always some torque going back there, but it's quite limited in how much the system will send in anything other than extreme conditions, and it's not really possible to power slide the Golf R on a normal road or racetrack. If you fully deactivate traction and stability control and you've got like snow and ice or a skid pan with water on it, you can drift this car on the throttle, but that's not really possible in any sort of dry condition. Compare that to the Golf R, which now gets a twin clutch rear axle and a drift mode with the capability of sending 50% of engine torque to just one rear wheel. That car can be drifted in dry conditions. Shouldn't be doing that on the road, but on a racetrack, you'll extract a little bit more out of a Golf R compared to a T-Roc R. The good news is that for regular people just wanting to drive this car quickly and sportily, everything works just fine. I'm just pointing out that you do lose something compared to the Golf. One small additional negative is that, as is typical for small sports cars like this one with big grippy tires, the road noise in the T-Roc R can get a little bit loud on coarse chip around 100 kilometers per hour. So if you're traveling on B roads here in Australia, you definitely will notice the road noise. I think you expect that. I don't think the T-Roc R promises to be super luxurious and super refined, but you know, if you don't want that, you're gonna need to go for a lesser version of a T-Roc or a different car with smaller wheels, chunkier tires, and more sound insulation. So to wrap it all up, what are my final thoughts and feelings about the Volkswagen T-Roc R, and do I recommend this vehicle? Well, yes, I do recommend it quite wholeheartedly. I think that especially if you can pick one up at that $65,000 drive-away price that Volkswagen has been known to offer as a national deal in the past, this vehicle really is tremendous value for money. Its performance absolutely sparkles. This is a really quick car that can deploy all 221 kilowatts easily thanks to loads of tire grip and a good all-wheel drive system. But beyond that, the chassis is also excellent. This vehicle is fun to drive, just commuting or especially on a country road, and that's really what it's all about. It looks good, the interior is decent. Of course, you can find some negatives about it. It's a little bit scratchy in that cabin. You can tell it's meant to be the cheapest R. It's a little noisy, it's a little thirsty. But on the whole, this vehicle delivers its mission. It's meant to be a very fun, very sporty, small SUV. And Volkswagen has pretty much nailed it, I reckon, with the T-Roc R. So yeah, if I was looking in this segment, I'd go out and buy this vehicle. Very keen to know your opinion. Please let me know down below in the comments what you reckon. While you're down there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.